Hello. Tonight, we begin with the most fascinating fairy tale. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Elderbush. Once upon a time, there was a little boy who had taken cold. He had gone out and got his feet wet, though nobody could imagine how it had happened, for it was quite dry weather. So his mother undressed him, put him to bed, and had the teapot brought in to make him a good cup of elderflower tea. Just at that moment, the merry old man came in, who lived up atop of the house all alone, for he had neither wife nor children. But he liked children very much, and knew so many fairy tales, that it was quite delightful. "Now drink your tea," said the boy's mother. "Then, perhaps, you may hear a fairy tale." "If I had but something new to tell," said the old man. "But how did the child get his feet wet?" "That is the very thing that nobody can make out," said his mother. "Am I to hear a fairy tale?" asked the little boy. "Yes, if you can tell me exactly, for I must know that first, how deep the gutter is in the little street opposite that you pass through in going to school." "Just up to the middle of my boot," said the child. "But then I must go into the deep hole." "Ali, that's where the wet feet came from," said the old man. "I ought now to tell you a story, but I don't know anymore." "You can make one in a moment," said the little boy. "My mother says that all you look at can be turned into a fairy tale, and that you can find a story in everything." "Yes, but such tales and stories are good for nothing. The right sort come of themselves. They tap at my forehead and say, 'Here we are.'" "Won't there be a tap soon?" asked the little boy. And his mother laughed, put some elderflowers in the teapot, and poured boiling water upon them. "Do tell me something. Pray do." "Yes, if a fairy tale would come of its own accord. But they are proud and haughty, and come only when they choose." "Stop," said he, all on a sudden. "I have it. Pay attention. There is one in the teapot." And the little boy looked at the teapot. The cover rose more and more, and the elderflowers came forth so fresh and white, and shot up long branches. Out of the spout even did they spread themselves on all sides, and grew larger and larger. It was a splendid elderbush, a whole tree, and it reached into the very bed and pushed the curtains aside. How it bloomed, and what an odor! In the middle of the bush sat a friendly-looking old woman in a most strange dress. It was quite green, like the leaves of the elder, and was trimmed with large white elder flowers, so that at first one could not tell whether it was a stuff or a natural green and real flowers. "What's that woman's name?" asked the little boy. "The Greeks and Romans," said the old man, "called her a dryad, but that we do not understand. The people who live in the new booths have a much better name for her. They call her Old Granny, and she it is to whom you are to pay attention. Now listen, and look at the beautiful Elderbush, a row of buildings for seamen in Copenhagen. Just such another large, blooming elder tree stands near the new booths. It grew there in the corner of a little miserable courtyard, and under it sat of an afternoon, in the most splendid sunshine, two old people, an old seaman, and his old wife. They had great-grandchildren, and were soon to celebrate the 50th anniversary of their marriage. But they could not exactly recollect the date, and old Granny sat in the tree and looked as pleased as now. "I know the date," said she, but those below did not hear her, for they were talking about old times. "Yes. Can't you remember when we were very little?" said the old seaman, "and ran and played about? It was the very same courtyard where we now are, and we stuck slips in the ground and made a garden." "I remember it well," said the old woman. "I remember it quite well. We watered the slips, and one of them was an elderbush. It took root, put forth green shoots, and grew up to be the large tree under which we old folks are now sitting." "To be sure," said he, "and there in the corner stood a water pail where I used to swim my boats." "True. But first we went to school to learn somewhat," said she, "and then we were confirmed. We both cried, but in the afternoon we went up the round tower and looked down on Copenhagen and far, far away over the water. Then we went to Frederiksberg, where the king and the queen were sailing about in their splendid barges. But I had a different sort of sailing to that, later, and that too for many a year, a long way off on great voyages. Yes, many a time have I wept for your sake," said she. "I thought you were dead and gone and lying down in the deep waters. Many a night have I got up to see if the wind had not changed. And changed it had, sure enough. But you never came. I remember so well one day, when the rain was pouring down in torrents. The scavengers were before the house where I was in service, and I had come up with the dust and remained standing at the door. It was dreadful weather, when just as I was there, the postman came and gave me a letter. It was from you. What a tour that letter had made. I opened it instantly and read. I laughed and wept. I was so happy. In it, I read that you were in warm lands where the coffee tree grows. What a blessed land that must be. You related so much, and I saw it all the while the rain was pouring down, and I standing there with the dust box. At the same moment came someone who embraced me. Yes, but you gave him a good box on his ear that made it tingle. But I did not know it was you. You arrived as soon as your letter, and you were so handsome that you still are, and had a long yellow silk handkerchief round your neck, and a brand new hat on. Oh, you were so dashing. Good heavens! What weather it was, and what a state the street was in. And then we married, said he. Don't you remember? And then we had our first little boy, and then Mary and Nicholas and Peter and Christian. Yes, and how they all grew up to be honest people and were beloved by everybody. And their children also have children, said the old sailor. Yes, those are our grandchildren, full of strength and vigor. It was, methinks, about this season that we had our wedding. Yes, this very day is the 50th anniversary of the marriage, said old Granny, sticking her head between the two old people, who thought it was their neighbor who nodded to them. They looked at each other and held one another by the hand. Soon after came their children and their grandchildren, for they knew well enough that it was the day of the 50th anniversary, and had come with their gratulations that very morning. But the old people had forgotten it, although they were able to remember all that had happened many years ago. And the elderbush sent forth a strong odor in the sun that was just about to set, and shone right in the old people's faces. They both looked so rosy-cheeked, and the youngest of the grandchildren danced around them, and called out quite delighted that there was to be something very splendid that evening. They were all to have hot potatoes, and old Nanny nodded in the bush and shouted, "Hurrah!" with the rest. "But that is no fairy tale," said the little boy, who was listening to the story. "The thing is, you must understand it," said the narrator. "Let us ask old Nanny." "That was no fairy tale, 'tis true," said old Nanny. "But now it's coming. The most wonderful fairy tales grow out of that which is reality. Were that not the case, you know, my magnificent elderbush could not have grown out of the teapot." And then she took the little boy out of bed, laid him on her bosom, and the branches of the elder tree, full of flowers, closed around her. They sat in an aerial dwelling, and it flew with them through the air. Oh, it was wondrous beautiful. Old Nanny had grown all of a sudden a young and pretty maiden, but her robe was still the same green stuff with white flowers, which she had worn before. On her bosom, she had a real elderflower, and in her yellow waving hair, a wreath of the flowers. Her eyes were so large and blue that it was a pleasure to look at them. She kissed the boy, and now they were of the same age, and felt alike. Hand in hand they went out of the bower, and they were standing in the beautiful garden of their home. Near the green lawn, Papa's walking stick was tied, and for the little ones, it seemed to be endowed with life. For as soon as they got astride it, the round, polished knob was turned into a magnificent neighing head. A long black mane fluttered in the breeze, and four slender yet strong legs shot out. The animal was strong and handsome, and away they went at full gallop round the lawn. "Huzzah! Now we are riding miles off," said the boy. "We are riding away to the castle where we were last year." And on they rode round the grass plot, and the little maiden, who, we know, was no one else but old Nanny, kept on crying out, "Now we are in the country. Don't you see the farmhouse yonder? And there is an elder tree standing beside it, and the cock is scraping away the earth for the hens. Look how he struts. And now we are close to the church. It lies high upon the hill, between the large oak trees, one of which is half decayed. And now we are by the smithy, where the fire is blazing, and where the half-naked men are banging with their hammers till the sparks fly about. Away, away, to the beautiful country seat." And all that the little maiden, who sat behind on the stick, spoke of, flew by in reality. The boy saw it all, and yet they were only going round the grass plot. Then they played in a side avenue, and marked out a little garden on the earth, and they took elder blossoms from their hair, planted them, and they grew just like those the old people planted when they were children, as related before. They went hand in hand, as the old people had done when they were children, but not to the round tower, or to Friedericksburg. No, the little damsel wound her arms round the boy, and then they flew far away through all Denmark, and spring came, and summer, and then it was autumn, and then winter, and 1,000 pictures were reflected in the eye and in the heart of the boy, and the little girl always sang to him, "This you will never forget." And during their whole flight, the elder tree smelt so sweet and odorous. He remarked the roses and the fresh beeches, but the elder tree had a more wondrous fragrance, for its flowers hung on the breast of the little maiden, and there, too, did he often lay his head during the flight. "It is lovely here in spring," said the young maiden, and they stood in a beech wood that had just put on its first green, where the wood roof at their feet sent forth its fragrance, and the pale red anemone looked so pretty among the verdure. Oh, would it were always spring in the sweetly smelling Danish beech forests. Asperula odorata. "It is lovely here in summer," said she, and she flew past old castles of bygone days of chivalry, where the red walls and the embattled gables were mirrored in the canal, where the swans were swimming, and peered up into the old cool avenues. In the fields, the corn was waving like the sea. In the ditches, red and yellow flowers were growing, while wild drone flowers and blooming convolvuluses were creeping in the hedges. And towards evening, the moon rose round and large, and the haycocks in the meadows smelt so sweetly. This one never forgets. "It is lovely here in autumn," said the little maiden. And suddenly, the atmosphere grew as blue again as before. The forest grew red and green and yellow-colored. The dogs came leaping along, and whole flocks of wild fowl flew over the cairn, where blackberry bushes were hanging round the old stones. The sea was dark blue, covered with ships full of white sails, and in the barn, old women, maidens, and children were sitting picking hops into a large cask. The young sang songs, but the old told fairy tales of mountain sprites and soothsayers. Nothing could be more charming. "It is delightful here in winter," said the little maiden. And all the trees were covered with hoarfrost. They looked like white corals. The snow crackled underfoot, as if one had new boots on, and one falling star after the other was seen in the sky. The Christmas tree was lighted in the room. Presents were there, and good humor reigned. In the country, the violin sounded in the room of the peasant. The newly baked cakes were attacked. Even the poorest child said, "It is really delightful here in winter." Yes, it was delightful. And the little maiden showed the boy everything. And the elder tree still was fragrant, and the red flag with the white cross was still waving, the flag under which the old seamen in the new booths had sailed. And the boy grew up to be a lad, and was to go forth in the wide world far, far away to warm lands, where the coffee tree grows. But at his departure, the little maiden took an elder blossom from her bosom, and gave it him to keep. And it was placed between the leaves of his prayer book. And when in foreign lands he opened the book, it was always at the place where the keepsake flower lay. And the more he looked at it, the fresher it became. He felt, as it were, the fragrance of the Danish groves, and from among the leaves of the flowers, he could distinctly see the little maiden, peeping forth with her bright blue eyes. And then she whispered, "It is delightful here in spring, summer, autumn and winter, and 100 visions glided before his mind. Thus passed many years, and he was now an old man, and sat with his old wife under the blooming tree. They held each other by the hand, as the old grandfather and grandmother yonder in the new booths did. And they talked exactly like them of old times, and of the 50th anniversary of their wedding. The little maiden, with the blue eyes, and with elder blossoms in her hair, sat in the tree, nodded to both of them, and said, "Today is the 50th anniversary." And then she took 2 flowers out of her hair and kissed them. First, they shone like silver, then like gold, and when they laid them on the heads of the old people, each flower became a golden crown. So there they both sat, like a king and a queen, under the fragrant tree that looked exactly like an elder. The old man told his wife the story of Old Nanny, as it had been told him when a boy, and it seemed to both of them it contained much that resembled their own history, and those parts that were like it pleased them best. "Thus it is," said the little maiden in the tree. "Some call me Old Nanny, others a Dryad, but in reality my name is Remembrance. 'Tis I who sit in the tree that grows and grows. I can remember, I can tell things. Let me see if you have my flower still." And the old man opened his prayer book. There lay the elder blossom, as fresh as if it had been placed there but a short time before, and Remembrance nodded. And the old people, decked with crowns of gold, sat in the flush of the evening sun. They closed their eyes, and yes, that's the end of the story. The little boy lay in his bed. He did not know if he had dreamed or not, or if he had been listening while someone told him the story. The teapot was standing on the table, but no elder tree was growing out of it, and the old man who had been talking was just on the point of going out at the door. And he did go. "How splendid that was," said the little boy. "Mother, I have been to warm countries." "So I should think," said his mother, "when one has drunk 2 good cupfuls of elderflower tea, 'tis likely enough one goes into warm climates." And she tucked him up nicely, lest he should take cold. "You have had a good sleep while I have been sitting here and arguing with him whether it was a story or a fairy tale." "And where is Old Nanny?" asked the little boy. "In the teapot," said his mother, "and there she may remain." The Elfin Hill. A few large lizards were running nimbly about in the clefts of an old tree. They could understand one another very well, for they spoke the lizard language. "What a buzzing and a rumbling there is in the Elfin Hill," said one of the lizards. "I have not been able to close my eyes for 2 nights on account of the noise. I might just as well have had the toothache, for that always keeps me awake." "There is something going on within there," said the other lizard. "They propped up the top of the hill with 4 red posts till cockcrow this morning, so that it is thoroughly aired, and the elfin girls have learnt new dances. There is something. I spoke about it to an earthworm of my acquaintance," said a third lizard. The earthworm had just come from the Elfin Hill, where he has been groping about in the earth day and night. He has heard a great deal. Although he cannot see, poor miserable creature, yet he understands very well how to wriggle and lurk about. They expect friends in the Elfin Hill, grand company too. But who they are, the earthworm would not say, or perhaps he really did not know. All the will-o'-the-wisps are ordered to be there to hold a torch dance, as it is called. The silver and gold, which is plentiful in the hill, will be polished and placed out in the moonlight. "Who can the strangers be?" asked the lizards. "What can the matter be? Hark, what a buzzing and humming there is." Just at this moment, the Elfin Hill opened, and an old elfin maiden, hollow behind, came tripping out. She was the old elf king's housekeeper, and a distant relative of the family. Therefore, she wore an amber heart on the middle of her forehead. Her feet moved very fast. Trip, trip. Good gracious, how she could trip right down to the sea to the night raven. "You are invited to the Elf Hill for this evening," said she. "But will you do me a great favor and undertake the invitations? You ought to do something, for you have no housekeeping to attend to, as I have. We are going to have some very grand people, conjurers, who have always something to say, and therefore the old elf king wishes to make a great display." "Who is to be invited?" asked the raven. "All the world may come to the great ball, even human beings, if they can only talk in their sleep, or do something after our fashion. But for the feast, the company must be carefully selected. We can only admit persons of high rank. I have had a dispute myself with the Elf King, as he thought we could not admit ghosts. The merman and his daughter must be invited first, although it may not be agreeable to them to remain so long on dry land. But they shall have a wet stone to sit on, or perhaps something better. So I think they will not refuse this time. We must have all the old demons of the first class, with tails, and the hobgoblins and imps. And then I think we ought not to leave out the death horse, or the grave pig, or even the church dwarf, although they do belong to the clergy, and are not reckoned among our people. But that is merely their office. They are nearly related to us, and visit us very frequently. "Croak," said the night raven, as he flew away with the invitations. The elfin maidens were already dancing on the Elf Hill, and they danced in shawls woven from moonshine and mist, which look very pretty to those who like such things. The large hall within the Elf Hill was splendidly decorated. The floor had been washed with moonshine, and the walls had been rubbed with magic ointment so that they glowed like tulip leaves in the light. In the kitchen were frogs roasting on the spit, and dishes preparing of snail skins, with children's fingers in them, salad of mushroom seed, hemlock, noses, and marrow of mice, beer from the Marsh Woman's brewery, and sparkling saltpeter wine from the grave cellars. These were all substantial food. Rusty nails and church window glass formed the dessert. The old elf king had his gold crown polished up with powdered slate pencil. It was like that used by the first form, and very difficult for an elf king to obtain. In the bedrooms, curtains were hung up and fastened with the slime of snails. There was, indeed, a buzzing and humming everywhere. Now we must fumigate the place with burnt horsehair and pig's bristles, and then I think I shall have done my part, said the elf manservant. Father, dear, said the youngest daughter, may I now hear who our high-born visitors are? Well, I suppose I must tell you now, he replied. 2 of my daughters must prepare themselves to be married, for the marriages certainly will take place. The old goblin from Norway, who lives in the ancient Dovre Mountains, and who possesses many castles built of rock and freestone, besides a gold mine, which is better than all, so it is thought, is coming with his 2 sons, who are both seeking a wife. The old goblin is a true-hearted, honest, old Norwegian graybeard, cheerful and straightforward. I knew him formerly when we used to drink together to our good fellowship. He came here once to fetch his wife. She is dead now. She was the daughter of the king of the chalk hills at Moen. They say he took his wife from chalk. I shall be delighted to see him again. It is said that the boys are ill-bred, forward lads. But perhaps that is not quite correct, and they will become better as they grow older. Let me see that you know how to teach them good manners. And when are they coming? Asked the daughter. That depends upon wind and weather, said the elf king. They travel economically. They will come when there is the chance of a ship. I wanted them to come over to Sweden, but the old man was not inclined to take my advice. He does not go forward with the times, and that I do not like. 2 will-o'-the-wisps came jumping in, one quicker than the other, so of course, one arrived first. They are coming, they are coming, he cried. Give me my crown, said the elf king, and let me stand in the moonshine. The daughters drew on their shawls and bowed down to the ground. There stood the old goblin from the Dovre Mountains, with his crown of hardened ice and polished fir cones. Besides this, he wore a bearskin and great, warm boots, while his sons went with their throats bare and wore no braces, for they were strong men. "Is that a hill?" said the youngest of the boys, pointing to the Elf Hill. "We should call it a hole in Norway." "Boys," said the old man, "a hole goes in, and a hill stands out. Have you no eyes in your heads?" Another thing they wondered at was that they were able, without trouble, to understand the language. "Take care," said the old man, "or people will think you have not been well brought up." Then they entered the Elfin Hill, where the select and grand company were assembled, and so quickly had they appeared that they seemed to have been blown together. But for each guest, the neatest and pleasantest arrangement had been made. The sea folks sat at table in great water tubs, and they said it was just like being at home. All behaved themselves properly, excepting the two young northern goblins. They put their legs on the table and thought they were all right. "Feet off the tablecloth," said the old goblin. They obeyed, but not immediately. Then they tickled the ladies who waited at table with the fir cones, which they carried in their pockets. They took off their boots, that they might be more at ease, and gave them to the ladies to hold. But their father, the old goblin, was very different. He talked pleasantly about the stately Norwegian rocks, and told fine tales of the waterfalls which dashed over them with a clattering noise like thunder, or the sound of an organ spreading their white foam on every side. He told of the salmon that leaps in the rushing waters, while the water god plays on his golden harp. He spoke of the bright winter nights when the sledge bells are ringing, and the boys run with burning torches across the smooth ice, which is so transparent that they can see the fishes dart forward beneath their feet. He described everything so clearly that those who listened could see it all. They could see the sawmills going, the men servants and the maidens singing songs, and dancing a rattling dance, when all at once the old goblin gave the old elfin maiden a kiss, such a tremendous kiss, and yet they were almost strangers to each other. Then the elfin girls had to dance, first in the usual way, and then with stamping feet, which they performed very well. Then followed the artistic and solo dance. Dear me, how they did throw their legs about! No one could tell where the dance begun or where it ended, nor indeed which were legs and which were arms, for they were all flying about together, like the shavings in a sawpit, and then they spun round so quickly that the death horse and the grave pig became sick and giddy, and were obliged to leave the table. "Stop!" cried the old goblin. "Is that the only housekeeping they can perform? can they do anything more than dance and throw about their legs and make a whirlwind? You shall soon see what they can do, said the Elf King. And then he called his youngest daughter to him. She was slender and fair as moonlight, and the most graceful of all the sisters. She took a white chip in her mouth and vanished instantly. This was her accomplishment. But the old goblin said he should not like his wife to have such an accomplishment, and thought his boys would have the same objection. Another daughter could make a figure like herself follow her, as if she had a shadow, which none of the goblin folk ever had. The third was of quite a different sort. She had learnt in the brew house of the Moor Witch how to lard elfin puddings with glowworms. She will make a good housewife, said the old goblin, and then saluted her with his eyes instead of drinking her health, for he did not drink much. Now came the fourth daughter, with a large harp to play upon, and when she struck the first chord, every one lifted up the left leg, for the goblins are left-legged. And at the second chord, they found they must all do just what she wanted. That is a dangerous woman, said the old goblin, and the two sons walked out of the hill. They had had enough of it. And what can the next daughter do? Asked the old goblin. I have learnt everything that is Norwegian, said she, and I will never marry unless I can go to Norway. Then her youngest sister whispered to the old goblin, that is only because she has heard in a Norwegian song that when the world shall decay, the cliffs of Norway will remain standing like monuments. And she wants to get there, that she may be safe, for she is so afraid of sinking. Ho, ho, said the old goblin. Is that what she means? Well, what can the seventh and last do? The sixth comes before the seventh, said the Elf King, for he could reckon, but the sixth would not come forward. I can only tell people the truth, said she. No one cares for me, nor troubles himself about me, and I have enough to do to sew my grave clothes. So the seventh and last came. And what could she do? Why, she could tell stories, as many as you liked, on any subject. Here are my 5 fingers, said the old goblin. Now tell me a story for each of them. So she took him by the wrist, and he laughed till he nearly choked. And when she came to the 4th finger, there was a gold ring on it, as if it knew there was to be a betrothal. Then the old goblin said, Hold fast what you have. This hand is yours, for I will have you for a wife myself. Then the elfin girl said that the stories about the ring finger and little Peter Playman had not yet been told. We will hear them in the winter, said the old goblin, and also about the fir and the birch trees, and the ghost stories, and of the tingling frost. You shall tell your tales, for no one over there can do it so well. And we will sit in the stone rooms where the pine logs are burning, and drink mead out of the golden drinking horn of the old Norwegian kings. The water god has given me two, and when we sit there, Nix comes to pay us a visit, and will sing you all the songs of the mountain shepherdesses. How merry we shall be! The salmon will be leaping in the waterfalls and dashing against the stone walls, but he will not be able to come in. It is indeed very pleasant to live in old Norway. But where are the lads? Where indeed were they? Why, running about the fields and blowing out the will-o'-the-wisps, who so good-naturedly came and brought their torches. What tricks have you been playing? Said the old goblin. I have taken a mother for you, and now you may take one of your aunts. But the youngsters said they would rather make a speech and drink to their good fellowship. They had no wish to marry. Then they made speeches and drank toasts and tipped their glasses to show that they were empty. Then they took off their coats and lay down on the table to sleep, for they made themselves quite at home. But the old goblin danced about the room with his young bride and exchanged boots with her, which is more fashionable than exchanging rings. The cock is crowing, said the old elfin maiden, who acted as housekeeper. Now we must close the shutters, that the sun may not scorch us. Then the hill closed up, but the lizards continued to run up and down the riven tree. And one said to the other, "Oh, how much I was pleased with the old goblin." "The boys pleased me better," said the earthworm. But then the poor miserable creature could not see. The Red Shoes. There was once a little girl who was very pretty and delicate, but in summer she was forced to run about with bare feet. She was so poor, and in winter wear very large wooden shoes, which made her little insteps quite red, and that looked so dangerous. In the middle of the village lived old Dame Shoemaker. She sat and sewed together, as well as she could, a little pair of shoes out of old red strips of cloth. They were very clumsy, but it was a kind thought. They were meant for the little girl. The little girl was called Karen. On the very day her mother was buried, Karen received the red shoes and wore them for the first time. They were certainly not intended for mourning, but she had no others, and with stockingless feet, she followed the poor straw coffin in them. Suddenly, a large, old carriage drove up, and a large old lady sat in it. She looked at the little girl, felt compassion for her, and then said to the clergyman, "Here, give me the little girl. I will adopt her." And Karen believed all this happened on account of the red shoes. But the old lady thought they were horrible, and they were burnt. But Karen herself was cleanly and nicely dressed. She must learn to read and sew. And people said she was a nice little thing. But the looking-glass said, "Thou art more than nice. Thou art beautiful." Now the queen once traveled through the land, and she had her little daughter with her. And this little daughter was a princess. And people streamed to the castle, and Karen was there also. And the little princess stood in her fine white dress in a window and let herself be stared at. She had neither a train nor a golden crown, but splendid red Morocco shoes. They were certainly far handsomer than those Dame Shoemaker had made for little Karen. Nothing in the world can be compared with red shoes. Now Karen was old enough to be confirmed. She had new clothes and was to have new shoes also. The rich shoemaker in the city took the measure of her little foot. This took place at his house, in his room, where stood large glass cases filled with elegant shoes and brilliant boots. All this looked charming, but the old lady could not see well, and so had no pleasure in them. In the midst of the shoes stood a pair of red ones, just like those the princess had worn. How beautiful they were! The shoemaker said also they had been made for the child of a count, but had not fitted. "That must be patent leather," said the old lady. "They shine so." "Yes, they shine," said Karen, and they fitted and were bought. But the old lady knew nothing about their being red, else she would never have allowed Karen to have gone in red shoes to be confirmed. Yet such was the case. Everybody looked at her feet, and when she stepped through the chancel door on the church pavement, it seemed to her as if the old figures on the tombs, those portraits of old preachers and preachers' wives with stiff ruffs and long black dresses, fixed their eyes on her red shoes, and she thought only of them as the clergyman laid his hand upon her head and spoke of the holy baptism, of the covenant with God, and how she should be now a matured Christian. And the organ pealed so solemnly, the sweet children's voices sang, and the old music directors sang. But Karen only thought of her red shoes. In the afternoon, the old lady heard from everyone that the shoes had been red, and she said that it was very wrong of Karen, that it was not at all becoming, and that in future Karen should only go in black shoes to church, even when she should be older. The next Sunday, there was the sacrament, and Karen looked at the black shoes, looked at the red ones, looked at them again, and put on the red shoes. The sun shone gloriously. Karen and the old lady walked along the path through the corn. It was rather dusty there. At the church door stood an old soldier with a crutch and with a wonderfully long beard, which was more red than white. And he bowed to the ground and asked the old lady whether he might dust her shoes. And Karen stretched out her little foot. "See, what beautiful dancing shoes," said the soldier. "Sit firm when you dance." And he put his hand out towards the soles. And the old lady gave the old soldier alms, and went into the church with Karen, and all the people in the church looked at Karen's red shoes and all the pictures. And as Karen knelt before the altar and raised the cup to her lips, she only thought of the red shoes, and they seemed to swim in it. And she forgot to sing her psalm, and she forgot to pray, "Our Father in heaven." Now all the people went out of church, and the old lady got into her carriage. Karen raised her foot to get in after her, when the old soldier said, "Look, what beautiful dancing shoes." And Karen could not help dancing a step or two, and when she began, her feet continued to dance. It was just as though the shoes had power over them. She danced round the church corner. She could not leave off. The coachman was obliged to run after and catch hold of her. And he lifted her in the carriage, but her feet continued to dance, so that she trod on the old lady dreadfully. At length, she took the shoes off, and then her legs had peace. The shoes were placed in a closet at home, but Karen could not avoid looking at them. Now the old lady was sick, and it was said she could not recover. She must be nursed and waited upon, and there was no one whose duty it was so much as Karen's. But there was a great ball in the city, to which Karen was invited. She looked at the old lady, who could not recover. She looked at the red shoes, and she thought there could be no sin in it. She put on the red shoes. She might do that also, she thought. But then she went to the ball and began to dance. When she wanted to dance to the right, the shoes would dance to the left. And when she wanted to dance up the room, the shoes danced back again, down the steps, into the street, and out of the city gate. She danced, and was forced to dance straight out into the gloomy wood. Then it was suddenly light up among the trees, and she fancied it must be the moon, for there was a face, but it was the old soldier with the red beard. He sat there, nodded his head, and said, "Look, what beautiful dancing shoes." Then she was terrified and wanted to fling off the red shoes, but they clung fast. And she pulled down her stockings, but the shoes seemed to have grown to her feet. And she danced and must dance over fields and meadows, in rain and sunshine, by night and day. But at night, it was the most fearful. She danced over the churchyard, but the dead did not dance. They had something better to do than to dance. She wished to seat herself on a poor man's grave, where the bitter tansy grew. But for her, there was neither peace nor rest. And when she danced towards the open church door, she saw an angel standing there. He wore long, white garments. He had wings which reached from his shoulders to the earth. His countenance was severe and grave, and in his hand he held a sword, broad and glittering. "Dance shalt thou," said he, "dance in thy red shoes till thou art pale and cold, till thy skin shrivels up and thou art a skeleton. Dance shalt thou from door to door, and where proud, vain children dwell, thou shalt knock, that they may hear thee and tremble. Dance shalt thou." "Mercy!" cried Karen. But she did not hear the angel's reply, for the shoes carried her through the gate, into the fields, across roads and bridges, and she must keep ever dancing. One morning, she danced past a door which she well knew. Within sounded a psalm. A coffin, decked with flowers, was borne forth. Then she knew that the old lady was dead, and felt that she was abandoned by all, and condemned by the angel of God. She danced, and she was forced to dance through the gloomy night. The shoes carried her over stack and stone. She was torn till she bled. She danced over the heath till she came to a little house. Here, she knew, dwelt the executioner, and she tapped with her fingers at the window and said, "Come out, come out." "I cannot come in, for I am forced to dance." And the executioner said, "Thou dost not know who I am, I fancy. I strike bad people's heads off, and I hear that my axe rings." "Don't strike my head off," said Karen. "Then I can't repent of my sins. But strike off my feet in the red shoes." And then she confessed her entire sin. And the executioner struck off her feet with the red shoes. But the shoes danced away with the little feet across the field into the deep wood. And he carved out little wooden feet for her and crutches, taught her the psalm criminals always sing. And she kissed the hand which had wielded the axe and went over the heath. "Now I have suffered enough for the red shoes," said she. "Now I will go into the church, that people may see me." And she hastened towards the church door. But when she was near it, the red shoes danced before her, and she was terrified and turned round. The whole week she was unhappy and wept many bitter tears. But when Sunday returned, she said, "Well, now I have suffered and struggled enough. I really believe I am as good as many a one who sits in the church and holds her head so high." And away she went boldly. But she had not got farther than the churchyard gate before she saw the red shoes dancing before her. And she was frightened and turned back and repented of her sin from her heart. And she went to the parsonage and begged that they would take her into service. She would be very industrious, she said, and would do everything she could. She did not care about the wages, only she wished to have a home and be with good people, and the clergyman's wife was sorry for her. and took her into service. And she was industrious and thoughtful. She sat still and listened when the clergyman read the Bible in the evenings. All the children thought a great deal of her. But when they spoke of dress and grandeur and beauty, she shook her head. The following Sunday, when the family was going to church, they asked her whether she would not go with them. But she glanced sorrowfully, with tears in her eyes, at her crutches. The family went to hear the word of God, but she went alone into her little chamber. There was only room for a bed and chair to stand in it, and here she sat down with her prayer book. And whilst she read with a pious mind, the wind bore the strains of the organ towards her, and she raised her tearful countenance and said, "O God, help me." And the sun shone so clearly, and straight before her stood the angel of God in white garments, the same she had seen that night at the church door. But he no longer carried the sharp sword, but in its stead a splendid green spray full of roses. And he touched the ceiling with the spray, and the ceiling rose high, and where he had touched it, there gleamed a golden star. And he touched the walls, and they widened out, and she saw the organ which was playing. She saw the old pictures of the preachers and the preachers' wives. The congregation sat in cushioned seats and sang out of their prayer books. For the church itself had come to the poor girl in her narrow chamber, or else she had come into the church. She sat in the pew with the clergyman's family, and when they had ended the psalm and looked up, they nodded and said, "It is right that thou art come." "It was through mercy," she said, and the organ pealed, and the children's voices in the choir sounded so sweet and soft. The clear sunshine streamed so warmly through the window into the pew where Karen sat. Her heart was so full of sunshine, peace, and joy that it broke. Her soul flew on the sunshine to God, and there no one asked after the red shoes. The Jumper. Once upon a time, in a small kingdom where even the smallest creatures were granted the right to dream grandly, there lived 3 proud jumpers: the flea, the grasshopper, and the skipjack. Each believed himself blessed with a gift so rare that the world should witness it. And so, with great ceremony, they announced a contest to see which of them could leap the highest. Invitations were sent far and wide, fluttering on the wind, and whispered from ear to ear, until even the king himself declared he would attend. "Let all come who wish to see the marvel," proclaimed the royal herald. "For His Majesty has promised a splendid reward, his daughter's hand in marriage to the one who jumps the highest." The royal hall was swept and decorated for the occasion. Sunlight poured through tall, stained glass windows, scattering shards of color across the marble floor. Courtiers filled the room, fanning themselves with silver fans, eager for amusement. Upon a raised dais sat the king, solemn yet curious. Beside him, the princess, whose eyes shone with the quiet mischief of one too often made the prize of strange competitions. The first to step forward was the flea. He was small, almost invisible, but his confidence was enormous. He bowed with elegant precision, once to the king, once to the princess, and once, modestly, to the audience. His manners were flawless, for, as everyone knew, he carried noble blood in his veins, the blood of ladies, no less. Having feasted upon humanity, he felt himself rather above the animal kingdom, and looked at his rivals with delicate disdain. Next came the grasshopper. He was larger, green as a spring meadow, and possessed a pleasing figure that gleamed beneath the chandeliers. He carried himself with the pride of an ancient lineage. "My ancestors," he announced, "were born in the sacred sands of Egypt, where we were honored as voices of the fields. I have just returned from the countryside, where I was a guest within a splendid card house 3 stories high. The walls were of the Queen of Hearts herself, and my song filled the air like temple bells." He straightened his legs and smoothed his wings. "I sing," he continued, "so sweetly that 16 native crickets, who have chirped all their lives without ever earning a card house of their own, would grow thin with envy if they heard me." The courtiers clapped politely, though a few crickets hidden beneath the floorboards muttered bitterly among themselves. The flea and the grasshopper both made sure that everyone in the room understood their noble claims, one by pedigree, the other by talent, and that both considered themselves entirely worthy of the princess's hand. Then, quietly, came the skipjack. He said nothing at all. He was small, simple, and made of the breastbone of a goose, a thing of wax and spring, with no voice to boast of, yet his silence intrigued the court. "He may not speak," whispered the old yard dog, sniffing him suspiciously, "but I can tell he comes from good stock, smells of honesty, and of supper." The royal counselor, a grave man who had earned 3 medals simply for keeping silent in meetings, cleared his throat and declared, "The skipjack is a creature of prophecy. From his bones, one might tell whether winter will be harsh or gentle, and that's more than can be said for the man who writes the almanac." The king nodded gravely. "We shall see," he said. "I speak little, but I think much." And so the contest began. The flea went first. With a twitch of his tiny limbs, he vanished. So high did he spring that no one could see him. The audience gasped, or perhaps pretended to, for how could anyone applaud what they could not witness? Murmurs rose. "He didn't jump at all," some whispered. "A trick," said others. The flea returned to the floor, insulted by their blindness. "Ignorance," he hissed under his breath. Next came the grasshopper. He flexed his long legs, hummed a few triumphant notes, and leapt, not quite as high as the flea, but far enough to land directly in the king's face. The monarch flinched, his crown tilting askew. "Highly improper," he roared. The grasshopper bowed in embarrassment, though he secretly thought the leap rather magnificent. Finally, the skipjack took his place. He stood still for a long time, so long that some thought his spring was broken. "Poor thing," muttered the yard dog, sniffing again. "He's lost his nerve." The princess leaned forward, amused. Then, snap, with a sudden, sharp motion, the skipjack flew into the air. Not high, not far, but perfectly aimed, landing gently in the lap of the princess herself, who let out a startled laugh. The crowd gasped. The flea fumed. The grasshopper sulked. The king rose. "The highest leap," he declared, "is not the one that vanishes from sight, nor the one that strikes my royal nose, but the one that reaches the heart. He who has sprung to my daughter has leapt highest indeed." And the skipjack, humble and silent, won the princess's hand. The flea muttered bitterly, "I leapt to heaven itself, and yet am unseen. But in this world, it seems, one must have a body to be believed." He packed his tiny knapsack and enlisted in foreign service, where, they say, he met his end upon a soldier's sleeve. The grasshopper, heartbroken and reflective, retired to a ditch outside the palace. There he sang to the twilight, a mournful tune of envy and wisdom. "A body is required," he repeated. "A body is required." His melancholy melody drifted through the reeds, and some say that's how this tale came to be told. As for the skipjack, he became a prince, light of body, but full of spring. The princess found him delightful, for though he was made of mere wax and wire, he could make her laugh whenever he leapt. And though others claimed the story was untrue, it was written down all the same, for in this world, what is printed often passes for truth. The Shepherdess and the Sweep. Have you ever seen an old wooden cupboard quite black with age and ornamented with carved foliage, and curious figures? Well, just such a cupboard stood in a parlor, and had been left to the family as a legacy by the great-grandmother. It was covered from top to bottom with carved roses and tulips. The most curious scrolls were drawn upon it, and out of them peeped little stags' heads with antlers. In the middle of the cupboard door was the carved figure of a man most ridiculous to look at. He grinned at you, for no one could call it laughing. He had goat's legs, little horns on his head, and a long beard. The children in the room always called him Major General Field Sergeant, Commander Billy Goat's Legs, and it was certainly a very difficult name to pronounce, and there are very few who ever receive such a title. But then it seemed wonderful how he came to be carved at all. Yet there he was, always looking at the table under the looking glass, where stood a very pretty little shepherdess made of china. Her shoes were gilt, and her dress had a red rose or an ornament. She wore a hat and carried a crook that were both gilded and looked very bright and pretty. Close by her side stood a little chimney sweep, as black as coal, and also made of china. He was, however, quite as clean and neat as any other china figure. He only represented a black chimney sweep, and the china workers might just as well have made him a prince had they felt inclined to do so. He stood holding his ladder quite handily, and his face was as fair and rosy as a girl's. Indeed, that was rather a mistake. It should have had some black marks on it. He and the shepherdess had been placed close together, side by side, and, being so placed, they became engaged to each other, for they were very well suited, being both made of the same sort of china, and being equally fragile. Close to them stood another figure, 3 times as large as they were, and also made of china. He was an old Chinaman who could nod his head, and used to pretend that he was the grandfather of the shepherdess, although he could not prove it. He, however, assumed authority over her, and therefore when Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billy Goat's Legs asked for the little shepherdess to be his wife, he nodded his head to show that he consented. "You will have a husband," said the old Chinaman to her, "who I really believe is made of mahogany. He will make you a lady of Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billy Goat's Legs. He has the whole cupboard full of silver plate, which he keeps locked up in secret drawers." "I won't go into the dark cupboard," said the little shepherdess. "I have heard that he has 11 china wives there already." "Then you shall be the 12th, said the old Chinaman. "Tonight, as soon as you hear a rattling in the old cupboard, you shall be married, as true as I am a Chinaman." And then he nodded his head and fell asleep. Then the little shepherdess cried and looked at her sweetheart, the china chimney sweep. "I must entreat you," said she, "to go out with me into the wide world, for we cannot stay here." "I will do whatever you wish," said the little chimney sweep. "Let us go immediately. I think I shall be able to maintain you with my profession. If we were but safely down from the table," said she, "I shall not be happy till we are really out in the world." Then he comforted her and showed her how to place her little foot on the carved edge and gilt leaf ornaments of the table. He brought his little ladder to help her, and so they contrived to reach the floor. But when they looked at the old cupboard, they saw it was all in an uproar. The carved stags pushed out their heads, raised their antlers, and twisted their necks. The Major General sprung up in the air and cried out to the old Chinaman, "They are running away! They are running away!" The two were rather frightened at this, so they jumped into the drawer of the window seat. Here were 3 or 4 packs of cards, not quite complete, and a doll's theater, which had been built up very neatly. A comedy was being performed in it, and all the queens of diamonds, clubs, and hearts, and spades sat in the first row, fanning themselves with tulips, and behind them stood all the knaves, showing that they had heads above and below, as playing cards generally have. The play was about 2 lovers who were not allowed to marry, and the shepherdess wept because it was so like her own story. "I cannot bear it," said she. "I must get out of the drawer." But when they reached the floor and cast their eyes on the table, there was the old Chinaman awake and shaking his whole body, till all at once down he came on the floor. Plump! "The old Chinaman is coming," cried the little shepherdess in a fright, and down she fell on one knee. "I have thought of something," said the chimney sweep. "Let us get into the great potpourri jar which stands in the corner. There we can lie on rose leaves and lavender, and throw salt in his eyes if he comes near us." "No, that will never do," said she, "because I know that the Chinaman and the potpourri jar were lovers once, and there always remains behind a feeling of goodwill between those who have been so intimate as that. No, there is nothing left for us but to go out into the wide world." "Have you really courage enough to go out into the wide world with me?" said the chimney sweep. "Have you thought how large it is, and that we can never come back here again?" "Yes, I have," she replied. When the chimney sweep saw that she was quite firm, he said, "My way is through the stove and up the chimney. Have you courage to creep with me through the firebox and the iron pipe? When we get to the chimney, I shall know how to manage very well. We shall soon climb too high for anyone to reach us, and we shall come through a hole in the top out into the wide world." So he led her to the door of the stove. "It looks very dark," said she. Still she went in with him through the stove and through the pipe, where it was as dark as pitch. "Now we are in the chimney," said he, "and look, there is a beautiful star shining above it." It was a real star shining down upon them, as if it would show them the way. So they clambered and crept on, and a frightful steep place it was. But the chimney sweep helped her and supported her, till they got higher and higher. He showed her the best places on which to set her little china foot. So at last they reached the top of the chimney and sat themselves down, for they were very tired, as may be supposed. The sky, with all its stars, was over their heads, and below were the roofs of the town. They could see for a very long distance out into the wide world, and the poor little shepherdess leaned her head on her chimney sweep's shoulder and wept till she washed the gilt off her sash. The world was so different to what she expected. "This is too much," she said. "I cannot bear it. The world is too large. Oh, I wish I were safe back on the table again, under the looking glass. I shall never be happy till I am safe back again. Now I have followed you out into the wide world. You will take me back, if you love me." Then the chimney sweep tried to reason with her, and spoke of the old Chinaman, and of the Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billy Goat's legs. But she sobbed so bitterly, and kissed her little chimney sweep, till he was obliged to do all she asked, foolish as it was. And so, with a great deal of trouble, they climbed down the chimney, and then crept through the pipe and stove, which were certainly not very pleasant places. Then they stood in the dark firebox and listened behind the door to hear what was going on in the room. As it was all quiet, they peeped out. Alas, there lay the old Chinaman on the floor. He had fallen down from the table as he attempted to run after them, and was broken into 3 pieces. His back had separated entirely, and his head had rolled into a corner of the room. The Major General stood in his old place and appeared lost in thought. "This is terrible," said the little shepherdess. "My poor old grandfather is broken to pieces, and it is our fault. I shall never live after this." And she wrung her little hands. "He can be riveted," said the chimney sweep. "He can be riveted. Do not be so hasty. If they cement his back and put a good rivet in it, he will be as good as new, and be able to say as many disagreeable things to us as ever." "Do you think so?" said she. And then they climbed up to the table and stood in their old places. "As we have done no good," said the chimney sweep, "we might as well have remained here, instead of taking so much trouble." "I wish grandfather was riveted," said the shepherdess. Will it cost much, I wonder?" And she had her wish. The family had the Chinaman's back mended, and a strong rivet put through his neck. He looked as good as new, but he could no longer nod his head. "You have become proud since your fall broke you to pieces," said Major General Field Sergeant, Commander Billy Goat's Legs. "You have no reason to give yourself such airs. Am I to have her or not?" The chimney sweep and the little shepherdess looked piteously at the old Chinaman, for they were afraid he might nod. But he was not able. Besides, it was so tiresome to be always telling strangers he had a rivet in the back of his neck. And so the little China people remained together and were glad of the grandfather's rivet, and continued to love each other till they were broken to pieces. Holger Danske. In Denmark, there stands an old castle named Kronenborg, close by the sound of Elsinore, where large ships, both English, Russian, and Prussian, pass by hundreds every day, and they salute the old castle with cannons, boom, boom, which is as if they said, "Good day." And the cannons of the old castle answer boom, which means many thanks. In winter, no ships sail by, for the whole sound is covered with ice as far as the Swedish coast, and has quite the appearance of a high road. The Danish and the Swedish flags wave, and Danes and Swedes say, "Good day," and "Thank you" to each other, not with cannons, but with a friendly shake of the hand, and they exchange white bread and biscuits with each other, because foreign articles taste the best. But the most beautiful sight of all is the old castle of Kronenberg, where Holger Danske sits in the deep, dark cellar into which no one goes. He is clad in iron and steel, and rests his head on his strong arm. His long beard hangs down upon the marble table, into which it has become firmly rooted. He sleeps and dreams, but in his dreams he sees everything that happens in Denmark. On each Christmas Eve, an angel comes to him and tells him that all he has dreamed is true, and that he may go to sleep again in peace, as Denmark is not yet in any real danger. But should danger ever come, then Holger Danske will rouse himself, and the table will burst asunder as he draws out his beard. Then he will come forth in his strength and strike a blow that shall sound in all the countries of the world. An old grandfather sat and told his little grandson all this about Holger Danske, and the boy knew that what his grandfather told him must be true. As the old man related this story, he was carving an image in wood to represent Holger Danske, to be fastened to the prow of a ship. For the old grandfather was a carver in wood, that is, one who carved figures for the heads of ships according to the names given to them. And now he had carved Holger Danske, who stood there erect and proud, with his long beard, holding in one hand his broad battle axe, while with the other he leaned on the Danish arms. The old grandfather told the little boy a great deal about Danish men and women who had distinguished themselves in olden times, so that he fancied he knew as much even as Holger Danske himself, who, after all, could only dream. And when the little fellow went to bed, he thought so much about it that he actually pressed his chin against the counterpane and imagined that he had a long beard, which had become rooted to it. But the old grandfather remained sitting at his work and carving away at the last part of it, which was the Danish arms. And when he had finished, he looked at the whole figure and thought of all he had heard and read, and what he had that evening related to his little grandson. Then he nodded his head, wiped his spectacles, and put them on, and said, "Ah, yes, Holger Danske will not appear in my lifetime, but the boy who is in bed there may very likely live to see him when the event really comes to pass." And the old grandfather nodded again, and the more he looked at Holger Danske, the more satisfied he felt that he had carved a good image of him. It seemed to glow with the color of life. The armor glittered like iron and steel. The hearts in the Danish arms grew more and more red, while the lions, with gold crowns on their heads, were leaping up. "That is the most beautiful coat of arms in the world," said the old man. "The lions represent strength, and the hearts, gentleness and love." And as he gazed on the uppermost lion, he thought of King Canute, who chained great England to Denmark's throne. And he looked at the second lion and thought of Waldemar, who untied Denmark and conquered the Vandals. The third lion reminded him of Margaret, who united Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. But when he gazed at the red hearts, their colors glowed more deeply, even as flames, and his memory followed each in turn. The first led him to a dark, narrow prison, in which sat a prisoner, a beautiful woman, daughter of Christian IV, Eleanor Ulfeld, and the flame became a rose on her bosom, and its blossoms were not more pure than the heart of this noblest and bed of all Danish women. "Ah, yes, that is indeed a noble heart in the Danish arms," said the grandfather, and his spirit followed the second flame, which carried him out to sea, where cannons roared and the ships lay shrouded in smoke, and the flaming heart attached itself to the breast of Hvitfeldt in the form of the ribbon of an order, as he blew himself and his ship into the air in order to save the fleet. And the third flame led him to Greenland's wretched huts, where the preacher, Hans Egede, ruled with love in every word and action. The flame was as a star on his breast, and added another heart to the Danish arms. And as the old grandfather's spirit followed the next hovering flame, he knew whither it would lead him. In a peasant woman's humble room stood Frederick VI, writing his name with chalk on the beam. The flame trembled on his breast and in his heart, and it was in the peasant's room that his heart became one for the Danish arms. The old grandfather wiped his eyes, for he had known King Frederick, with his silvery locks and his honest blue eyes, and had lived for him, and he folded his hands and remained for some time silent. Then his daughter came to him and said it was getting late, that he ought to rest for a while, and that the supper was on the table. "What you have been carving is very beautiful, grandfather," said she. "Holger Danske and the old coat of arms. It seems to me as if I have seen the face somewhere." "No, that is impossible," replied the old grandfather. "But I have seen it, and I have tried to carve it in wood, as I have retained it in my memory. It was a long time ago, while the English fleet lay in the roads on the 2nd of April, when we showed that we were true, ancient Danes. I was on board the Denmark, in Steen Bille's squadron. I had a man by my side whom even the cannonballs seemed to fear. He sung old songs in a merry voice, and fired and fought as if he were something more than a man. I still remember his face, but from whence he came, or whither he went, I know not. No one knows. I have often thought it might have been Holger Danske himself, who had swam down to us from Kronenborg to help us in the hour of danger. That was my idea, and there stands his likeness. The wooden figure threw a gigantic shadow on the wall, and even on part of the ceiling. It seemed as if the real Holger Danske stood behind it, for the shadow moved. But this was no doubt caused by the flame of the lamp not burning steadily. Then the daughter-in-law kissed the old grandfather and led him to a large armchair by the table, and she and her husband, who was the son of the old man and the father of the little boy who lay in bed, sat down to supper with him, and the old grandfather talked of the Danish lions and the Danish hearts, emblems of strength and gentleness, and explained quite clearly that there is another strength than that which lies in a sword. And he pointed to a shelf where lay a number of old books, and amongst them a collection of Holberg's plays, which are much read and are so clever and amusing that it is easy to fancy we have known the people of those days who are described in them. He knew how to fight also, said the old man, for he lashed the follies and prejudices of people during his whole life. Then the grandfather nodded to a place above the looking-glass where hung an almanac with a representation of the round tower upon it, and said Tycho Brahe was another of those who used a sword, but not one to cut into the flesh and bone, but to make the way of the stars of heaven clear and plain to be understood. And then he whose father belonged to my calling, yes, he swore, the son of the old image carver, he whom we ourselves have seen, with his silvery locks and his broad shoulders, whose name is known in all lands. Yes, he was a sculptor, while I am only a carver. Holger Danske can appear in marble, so that people in all countries of the world may hear of the strength of Denmark. Now let us drink the health of Bertel. But the little boy in bed saw plainly the old castle of Kronenberg, and the sound of Elsinore, and Holger Danske far down in the cellar, with his beard rooted to the table, and dreaming of everything that was passing above him. And Holger Danske did dream of the little humble room in which the image carver sat. He heard all that had been said, and he nodded in his dream, saying, "Ah, yes, remember me, you Danish people. Keep me in your memory. I will come to you in the hour of need." The bright morning light shone over Kronenberg, and the wind brought the sound of the hunting horn across from the neighboring shores. The ships sailed by and saluted the castle with the boom of the cannon, and Kronenberg returned the salute. Boom, boom. But the roaring cannons did not awake Holger Danske, for they meant only good morning and thank you. They must fire in another fashion before he awakes. But wake he will, for there is energy yet in Holger Danske. The bell. In the narrow streets of a large town, people often heard in the evening, when the sun was setting, and his last rays gave a golden tint to the chimney pots, a strange noise which resembled the sound of a church bell. It only lasted an instant, for it was lost in the continual roar of traffic and hum of voices which rose from the town. The evening bell is ringing, people used to say. The sun is setting. Those who walked outside the town, where the houses were less crowded and interspersed by gardens and little fields, saw the evening sky much better, and heard the sound of the bell much more clearly. It seemed as though the sound came from a church deep in the calm, fragrant wood, and thither people looked with devout feelings. A considerable time elapsed. One said to the other, "I really wonder if there is a church out in the wood, the bell has indeed a strange, sweet sound. Shall we go there and see what the cause of it is?" The rich drove, the poor walked, but the way seemed to them extraordinarily long. And when they arrived at a number of willow trees, on the border of the wood they sat down, looked up into the great branches, and thought they were now really in the wood. A confectioner from the town also came out and put up a stall there. Then came another confectioner, who hung a bell over his stall, which was covered with pitch to protect it from the rain. But the clapper was wanting. When people came home, they used to say that it had been very romantic, and that really means something else than merely taking tea. 3 persons declared that they had gone as far as the end of the wood. They had always heard the strange sound, but there it seemed to them as if it came from the town. One of them wrote verses about the bell and said that it was like the voice of a mother speaking to an intelligent and beloved child. No tune, he said, was sweeter than the sound of the bell. The emperor of the country heard of it and declared that he who would really find out where the sound came from should receive the title of bell ringer to the world, even if there was no bell at all. Now many went out into the wood for the sake of this splendid birth, but only one of them came back with some sort of explanation. None of them had gone far enough, nor had he, and yet he said that the sound of the bell came from a large owl in a hollow tree. It was a wisdom owl, which continually knocked its head against the tree, but he was unable to say with certainty whether its head or the hollow trunk of the tree was the cause of the noise. He was appointed bell ringer to the world and wrote every year a short dissertation on the owl. But by this means, people did not become any wiser than they had been before. It was just Confirmation Day. The clergyman had delivered a beautiful and touching sermon. The candidates were deeply moved by it. It was indeed a very important day for them. They were all at once transformed from mere children to grown-up people. The childish soul was to fly over, as it were, into a more reasonable being. The sun shone most brightly, and the sound of the great unknown bell was heard more distinctly than ever. They had a mind to go thither, all except 3. One of them wished to go home and try on her ball dress, for this very dress and the ball were the cause of her being confirmed this time. Otherwise, she would not have been allowed to go. The second, a poor boy, had borrowed a coat and a pair of boots from the son of his landlord to be confirmed in, and he had to return them at a certain time. The third said that he never went into strange places if his parents were not with him. He had always been a good child and wished to remain so even after being confirmed, and they ought not to tease him for this. They, however, did it all the same. These three, therefore, did not go. The others went on. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and the confirmed children sang too, holding each other by the hand, for they had no position yet, and they were all equal in the eyes of God. Two of the smallest soon became tired and returned to the town. Two little girls sat down and made garlands of flowers. They, therefore, did not go on. When the others arrived at the willow trees, where the confectioner had put up his stall, they said, "Now we are out here. The bell does not in reality exist. It is only something that people imagine." Then suddenly, the sound of the bell was heard so beautifully and solemnly from the wood that 4 or 5 made up their minds to go still further on. The wood was very thickly grown. It was difficult to advance. Wood lilies and anemones grew almost too high. Flowering convolvuli and brambles were hanging like garlands from tree to tree, while the nightingales were singing and the sunbeams played. That was very beautiful. But the way was unfit for the girls. They would have torn their dresses. Large rocks, covered with moss of various hues, were lying about. The fresh spring water rippled forth with a peculiar sound. "I don't think that can be the bell," said one of the confirmed children. And then he lay down and listened. "We must try to find out if it is." And there he remained, and let the others walk on. They came to a hut built of the bark of trees and branches. A large crab-apple tree spread its branches over it, as if it intended to pour all its fruit on the roof, upon which roses were blooming. The long boughs covered the gable, where a little bell was hanging. Was this the one they had heard? All agreed that it must be so, except one who said that the bell was too small and too thin to be heard at such a distance, and that it had quite a different sound to that which had so touched men's hearts. He who spoke was a king's son, and therefore the others said that such a one always wishes to be cleverer than other people. Therefore they let him go alone, and as he walked on, the solitude of the wood produced a feeling of reverence in his breast. But still, he heard the little bell about which the others rejoiced. And sometimes, when the wind blew in that direction, he could hear the sounds from the confectioner's stall, where the others were singing at tea. But the deep sounds of the bell were much stronger. Soon, it seemed to him as if an organ played an accompaniment. The sound came from the left, from the side where the heart is. Now something rustled among the bushes, and a little boy stood before the king's son, in wooden shoes, and such a short jacket that the sleeves did not reach to his wrists. They knew each other. The boy was the one who had not been able to go with them, because he had to take the coat and boots back to his landlord's son. That he had done, and had started again in his wooden shoes and old clothes, for the sound of the bell was too enticing. He felt he must go on. "We might go together," said the king's son. But the poor boy with the wooden shoes was quite ashamed. He pulled at the short sleeves of his jacket and said that he was afraid he could not walk so fast. Besides, he was of opinion that the bell ought to be sought at the right, for there was all that was grand and magnificent. "Then we shall not meet," said the king's son, nodding to the poor boy, who went into the deepest part of the wood, where the thorns tore his shabby clothes and scratched his hands, face, and feet until they bled. The king's son also received several good scratches, but the sun was shining on his way, and it is he whom we will now follow, for he was a quick fellow. "I will and must find the bell," he said, "if I have to go to the end of the world." Ugly monkeys sat high in the branches and clenched their teeth. "Shall we beat him?" they said. "Shall we thrash him? He is a king's son." But he walked on, undaunted, deeper and deeper into the wood, where the most wonderful flowers were growing. There were standing white star lilies with blood-red stamens, sky-blue tulips shining when the wind moved them, apple trees covered with apples like large glittering soap bubbles. Only think how resplendent these trees were in the sunshine. All around were beautiful green meadows, where hart and hind played in the grass. There grew magnificent oaks and beech trees, and if the bark was split of any of them, long blades of grass grew out of the clefts. There were also large, smooth lakes in the wood, on which the swans were swimming about and flapping their wings. The king's son often stood still and listened. Sometimes he thought that the sound of the bell rose up to him out of one of these deep lakes. But soon he found that this was a mistake, and that the bell was ringing still farther in the wood. Then the sun set. The clouds were as red as fire. It became quiet in the wood. He sank down on his knees, sang an evening hymn, and said, "I shall never find what I am looking for. Now the sun is setting, and the night, the dark night, is approaching. Yet I may perhaps see the round sun once more before he disappears beneath the horizon. I will climb up these rocks. They are as high as the highest trees." And then, taking hold of the creepers and roots, he climbed up on the wet stones, where water snakes were wriggling, and the toads, as it were, barked at him. He reached the top before the sun, seen from such a height, had quite set. Oh, what a splendor! The sea, the great majestic sea, which was rolling its long waves against the shore, stretched out before him. And the sun was standing like a large, bright altar. And there, where sea and heaven met, all melted together in the most glowing colors. The wood was singing, and his heart too. The whole of nature was one large holy church, in which the trees and hovering clouds formed the pillars, the flowers, and grass, the woven velvet carpet, and heaven itself was the great cupola. Up there, the flame color vanished as soon as the sun disappeared, but millions of stars were lighted. Diamond lamps were shining, and the king's son stretched his arms out towards heaven, towards the sea, and towards the wood. Then suddenly, the poor boy with the short-sleeved jacket and the wooden shoes appeared. He had arrived just as quickly on the road he had chosen, and they ran towards each other and took one another's hand in the great cathedral of nature and poesy, and above them sounded the invisible holy bell. Happy spirits surrounded them, singing hallelujahs and rejoicing. Grandmother. Grandmother is very old. Her face is folded with soft wrinkles, and her hair has turned the color of winter snow. Yet, when you look into her eyes, you see something eternal there. Two quiet stars that still shine through the years. They are not bright like the stars of youth, but tender and full of peace, like those that watch over the world at dawn. When those eyes rest upon you, they seem to bless you without words. You feel comforted, as if she carries within her gaze the secret of a long and gentle life. Her dress is made of heavy, shimmering silk, with great flowers woven into its fabric, and when she moves, it rustles softly like the whisper of leaves in an old garden. Everything about her carries the dignity of another time, the slow grace, the calm of one who has seen both sorrow and joy and made peace with them. But most wonderful of all are her stories. Oh, the stories she tells. No one can tell a tale like grandmother. When she speaks, the past seems to breathe again. The air fills with forgotten voices, and every word feels alive. She knows so much, for she was here long before father or mother were even born. That is certain. On the table beside her lies her old hymn book, its cover worn and bound with silver clasps. She opens it often, and inside, between the yellowed pages, rests a rose, pressed, flat, dry, and faded. It has lost its color, its scent, its life. Yet whenever grandmother looks upon it, her face softens. A smile, half joy and half sorrow, trembles upon her lips, and her eyes grow moist. We, the children, watch her and wonder, why does she look at that withered flower so tenderly? What secret does it hold? And then, as her tears fall upon its brittle petals, something marvelous happens. The air grows warm, and the rose seems to breathe again. A fragrance fills the room, faint at first, then sweet and full. The walls melt away into a golden haze, and suddenly we are no longer in grandmother's parlor, but in a great green wood. The sunlight streams through branches thick with leaves. Birds sing. The earth smells of summer. And there, in that light, stands grandmother. But she is no longer old. She is a young maiden, radiant and fair, her cheeks fresh as morning roses, her hair bright and curling, her step light as laughter. Only her eyes remain the same, those mild, saintly eyes that belong to eternity. Beside her sits a young man, tall and strong. His hand is in hers. He gives her a rose, the very rose that now lies faded in her book, and she smiles, a smile of such pure happiness that even time itself must have paused to look. Grandmother cannot smile like that now, not with the same unguarded joy, but she remembers. That smile still lingers, faint but living. Each time she looks at the dried flower, it holds within it a whole lifetime, youth, love, and the first awakening of dreams that never truly die. But time, ever gentle and ever cruel, has passed. The young man is gone, and the rose has withered in the old hymn book. Grandmother sits again in her chair, her eyes lowered, her heart filled with the quiet ache of remembrance. The fragrance has faded, but the love remains. And now, grandmother is gone too. One evening, after telling us a long and beautiful story, a story of kings and angels and small miracles hidden in ordinary days, she said she was tired. She leaned her head back to rest, and we thought she had only fallen asleep. We heard her breathing softly, slowly, like the rhythm of a lullaby. Then the sound grew gentler still, until it ceased altogether. Her face grew bright with peace, as though a warm light shone from within. She smiled once more, the same smile she had given the young man long ago. And then people said she was dead. But we children did not believe she was gone. She looked too calm, too full of quiet joy. They placed her in a black coffin lined with white linen, and she looked so molt and beautiful that we were not afraid to look upon her. The wrinkles had vanished. Her hair shone like silver, and on her lips rested that sweet, mysterious smile. Beneath her head lay the hymn book, just as she had wished, and between its pages still slept the withered rose. Then they buried grandmother by the churchyard wall, where the wind hums softly through the grass. In spring, a rose tree grew from her grave, blooming soon with blossoms as bright as her smile. The nightingale came each evening to sing among its flowers, and its song mingled with the music of the organ in the church. Inside, the old psalms were sung, the very ones written in grandmother's hymn book beneath her resting head. When the moon rose, it shone gently upon the grave, silvering the petals of the roses and turning the grass to frost like lace. Yet grandmother was not there. The dead know far more than the living. They understand that to appear again among us would bring fear, not comfort. They have crossed beyond the veil to a peace where no pain or parting can reach them. And so we live, and we remember. The earth lies upon her coffin. Within it, the book has turned to dust. The rose has crumbled into nothing. Yet over the grave, fresh roses bloom each year. The nightingale sings, the organ plays, and within our hearts, grandmother still lives. Her gentle eyes, her soft hands, her voice that told stories sweeter than dreams. Her eyes, especially, will never die. They are like stars that cannot fade. One day, ours too shall open again, and we shall see her, not old and weary, but young and beautiful, as when she first smiled over a red, living rose. And then we shall know that love, like her eyes, belongs to eternity. The Darning Needle. Once upon a time, there lived a darning needle who thought herself the most exquisite of all instruments ever created. She was slender, gleaming, and sharp, and she knew it. "Handle me carefully," she would whisper to the fingers that reached for her, "for I am delicate beyond compare. Should I fall, you would never find me again. I am far too fine for this coarse world." The fingers, accustomed to pride in every form, pinched her around the waist. "You think very highly of yourself, little one," they said. "Of course," replied the needle, arching her glittering spine. "See, I travel with a train." And she drew behind her a long thread, so light it almost floated in the air, though, as vanity often neglects practicality, the thread bore no knot at its end. She was soon pressed against the cook's slipper, where a tear in the leather waited to be mended. "Such crude work!" she exclaimed. "Surely this cannot be my destiny, to pierce coarse hide, to labor among grease and grime. My fineness will not endure it." And indeed, at the first resistance, she snapped clean in two. Did I not say so?" She sighed with tragic grace. "I am too refined for this sort of existence." The fingers examined the broken piece and murmured, "She is useless now." Yet they did not discard her. The cook, in a moment of practicality, dropped a spot of sealing wax upon her blunt end and pinned her handkerchief in place with it. "There," said the darning needle proudly. "At last, I have risen to the position I deserve. A breastpin. I knew my worth would one day be recognized. Merit always ascends." She smiled, though of course no one ever sees a darning needle smile, and sat as still and dignified as a queen in her carriage. Beside her glimmered a common pin. The darning needle regarded it with polite condescension. "Pray, are you made of gold?" she asked. "You have a pleasant shimmer, though your head is rather small. Still, take care to grow, dear. Not everyone has the fortune to be crowned with sealing wax, as I am. But pride is slippery, and dignity often perches on the edge of disaster. In drawing herself up to appear more noble, she lost balance and tumbled, not gracefully, into the sink the cook was cleaning. The water swirled about her, carrying her away. "Ah," said the darning needle, "so begins my journey. I trust it shall be a grand one. Only, I do hope I shall not be lost." Yet lost she was, swept through the drain and into the gutter. There she lay among the refuse of the world, still consoling herself. "I am too fine for such surroundings," she murmured. "But I know my worth, and that is comfort enough." Around her drifted fragments of life, splinters of wood, straw, torn scraps of paper, and the murky whisper of the city above. "See how they rush about," said the darning needle, watching the floating debris. "Each imagines itself important. The chip sails by as though it carried the world's secrets. That straw, twisting, turning, desperate to be noticed, will soon strike a stone and break. And that piece of newspaper, its words have long been forgotten, yet it swells with pride as if they were eternal truths. I, at least, remain steadfast. I know who I am, and so I need not move." Days passed, and rain mingled with sunlight. Then something beside her caught the light, a shard of broken glass, gleaming like a captured star. The darning needle addressed it, naturally assuming equality. "You must be a diamond," she said approvingly. "Your brilliance rivals my own." "Why, yes," said the fragment, flattered. "Something of that sort." And so the two lay together, each imagining the other of great value, and spoke loftily about the folly of mankind. "I have dwelt in the work-box of a lady," said the darning needle, "a most distinguished lady. The cook, in fact, her 5 fingers were the most conceited creatures imaginable. Thumb, short and thick, claimed to be the strongest. The next, always dipped in sauces, fancied himself an artist. The middle finger towered proudly, believing height to be greatness. The ring finger strutted about with a golden band as though born to royalty. And the little one, oh, the little one, did nothing and bragged of leisure. Such arrogance among servants of flesh. Naturally, I withdrew. How tiresome humanity must be, said the glass shard. How fortunate that we glitter quietly instead. But even vanity may be carried away. A sudden stream of rainwater surged through the gutter, lifting the glass and sweeping it away into the unknown. So, he is promoted, said the darning needle. And I remain, but that is as it should be. I am too fine to drift. The world must come to me, not I to it. She gazed upward, where the sunlight filtered through puddles. Perhaps I was born of a sunbeam, she mused. The light seems always to search for me. Ah, I am so fine that even my maker could not find me again. Had I my old eye, which broke off long ago, I might have shed a tear. But no, that would be unbecoming. A lady must never cry. Time passed, and the world forgot her. Yet one day, a pair of street boys came poking in the gutter with sticks, searching for treasures. A bent nail, a lost coin, a token of luck. "Hello!" cried one, pricking his finger. "Here's a thing for you." "I am not a thing. I am a lady," said the darning needle, though no one heard. Her sealing wax had long since worn away, and she was tarnished black. Yet she thought this gave her a more elegant slenderness. "Black is slimming," she said proudly. "It suits my refinement." "Here's an eggshell," shouted the boys. They stuck the needle through it and sent it sailing upon the gutter's current. "Now that looks like a fine ship. White walls, and I am dark. What contrast," said the darning needle. "I shall be admired at last. I only hope I am not seasick. That would be terribly unladylike." But she bore the voyage well. "How fortunate I am to possess a steel stomach," she said. "Delicate souls can endure anything if they remember their dignity." Just then, a wagon rumbled past, its wheels splashing through the water. The little eggshell cracked beneath the weight. "Heavens!" cried the darning needle. "How violent! I am surely breaking." Yet she did not break. She lay still, her slender form unbent, half buried in the mud, shining faintly in the light of the setting sun. And there she remained, forgotten by all, yet ever proud, a darning needle who had once believed herself destined for embroidery and glory, and who now lay among the dust and dreams of the street, whispering to herself, "I am fine. I am fine still. The world may not see it, but I shall never forget who I am." The little match seller. It was terribly cold and nearly dark on the last evening of the old year, and the snow was falling fast. In the cold and the darkness, a poor little girl with bare head and naked feet roamed through the streets. It is true she had on a pair of slippers when she left home, but they were not of much use. They were very large, so large, indeed, that they had belonged to her mother, and the poor little creature had lost them in running across the street to avoid two carriages that were rolling along at a terrible rate. One of the slippers she could not find, and a boy seized upon the other and ran away with it, saying that he could use it as a cradle when he had children of his own. So the little girl went on with her little naked feet, which were quite red and blue with the cold. In an old apron, she carried a number of matches and had a bundle of them in her hands. No one had bought anything of her the whole day, nor had anyone given here even a penny. Shivering with cold and hunger, she crept along. Poor little child, she looked the picture of misery. The snowflakes fell on her long, fair hair, which hung in curls on her shoulders, but she regarded them not. Lights were shining from every window, and there was a savory smell of roast goose, for it was New Year's Eve. Yes, she remembered that. In a corner between two houses, one of which projected beyond the other, she sank down and huddled herself together. She had drawn her little feet under her, but she could not keep off the cold, and she dared not go home, for she had sold no matches, and could not take home even a penny of money. Her father would certainly beat her. Besides, it was almost as cold at home as here, for they had only the roof to cover them, through which the wind howled, although the largest holes had been stopped up with straw and rags. Her little hands were almost frozen with the cold. Ah, perhaps a burning match might be some good, if she could draw it from the bundle and strike it against the wall, just to warm her fingers. She drew one out. Scratch! How it sputtered as it burnt. It gave a warm, bright light, like a little candle, as she held her hand over it. It was really a wonderful light. It seemed to the little girl that she was sitting by a large iron stove with polished brass feet and a brass ornament. How the fire burned and seemed so beautifully warm that the child stretched out her feet as if to warm them, when, la, the flame of the match went out. The stove vanished, and she had only the remains of the half-burnt match in her hand. She rubbed another match on the wall. It burst into a flame, and where its light fell upon the wall, it became as transparent as a veil, and she could see into the room. The table was covered with a snowy white tablecloth, on which stood a splendid dinner service, and a steaming roast goose stuffed with apples and dried plums. And what was still more wonderful, the goose jumped down from the dish and waddled across the floor, with a knife and fork in its breast, to the little girl. Then the match went out, and there remained nothing but the thick, damp, cold wall before her. She lighted another match, and then she found herself sitting under a beautiful Christmas tree. It was larger and more beautifully decorated than the one which she had seen through the glass door at the rich merchant's. Thousands of tapers were burning upon the green branches, and colored pictures, like those she had seen in the show windows, looked down upon it all. The little one stretched out her hand towards them, and the match went out. The Christmas lights rose higher and higher, till they looked to her like the stars in the sky. Then she saw a star fall, leaving behind it a bright streak of fire. "Someone is dying," thought the little girl, for her old grandmother, the only one who had ever loved her and who was now dead, had told her that when a star falls, a soul was going up to God. She again rubbed a match on the wall, and the light shone round her. In the brightness stood her old grandmother, clear and shining, yet mild and loving in her appearance. "Grandmother," cried the little one, "oh, take me with you. I know you will go away when the match burns out. You will vanish like the warm stove, the roast goose, and the large, glorious Christmas tree." And she made haste to light the whole bundle of matches, for she wished to keep her grandmother there. And the matches glowed with a light that was brighter than the noonday, and her grandmother had never appeared so large or so beautiful. She took the little girl in her arms, and they both flew upwards in brightness and joy, far above the earth, where there was neither cold nor hunger nor pain, for they were with God. In the dawn of morning, there lay the poor little one, with pale cheeks and smiling mouth, leaning against the wall. She had been frozen to death on the last evening of the year, and the New Year's sun rose and shone upon a little corpse. The child still sat in the stiffness of death, holding the matches in her hand, one bundle of which was burnt. She tried to warm herself, said some. No one imagined what beautiful things she had seen, nor into what glory she had entered with her grandmother on New Year's Day.